and welcome back to 303. We turn now to Mr. Conrad's Unstoppable Volume Lesson 5.5. It's an interesting title. We'll look at it right away. I once complained of sore feet until I met a man with no legs. There's a famous saying, of course, that goes along with this, right? I complained about having no shoes until I met a man who had no feet. And there's a play on words. Let's put in our journals really quickly the focus, however, of this chapter about the things you can change and the things you can't change. Or write it this way: the things you can control and the things you can't control. Okay? And as we get into the end of this chapter, maybe we'll have a comment or two about this. I'm reading now with you on page 210 and following, Lesson 5.5. The title, Mr. Conrad says, the title of this story says it all. No matter how bad your situation is, someone else has it worse. If a person with no legs can become unstoppable, a person with sore feet has little to complain about. Several years ago, one of my students started complaining of quote-unquote sore feet. So that Friday, I introduced him to a, quote, man with no legs, unquote. This student with sore feet was complaining he wasn't going to finish his woods project. With only 2 weeks of school left, he had developed a laundry list of excuses why he would be unable to complete. Ironically, of course, we as seniors are reading this chapter with, roughly speaking, 2 weeks remaining. Thank you, Mr. McGee and Mr. Conrad. He finished his sore feet tirade by saying, "And there's nothing you can do about it." I'm not doing it, there's nothing you can do about it. All of my students know they must finish their projects to pass the class, and Mr. Sorefeet knew this as well. He was a senior, had taken my class for 4 years. This wasn't the first time he'd complained of sore feet, but I was determined to make it the last time. I didn't say a word to Mr. Sorefeet that day. I would have someone else do my talking. All week long, I made phone calls and preparations for what would become not only my favorite Friday story, but one of the most famous as well. The Associated Press, news, journalism people picked up the story in the newspapers nationwide. All my shop students were dismissed from their regular classes that Friday morning to attend the final Friday story of the year. Well over 100 kids jammed into my classroom. They packed in like sardines. Not one of them had a clue of what was about to take place. On the table, in front of the classroom, I had a speakerphone in my stereo. Once they'd settled, without saying a word, I smiled at them and walked over to the stereo. The drama was just beginning. I turned on the record player, old school. Some of you maybe know it as vinyl. I slowly lowered the needle. This is the way that you used to play old vinyl records. Bob Dylan, a great classic American music hero. Bob Dylan started to sing the song, "The Times They Are A-Changin'." The words go like this. By the way, you can Google the song if you'd like to hear the way it's sung. "Come gather around, people, wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept it that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, then you better start swimming, or you'll sink like a stone, for the times, they are a-changin'." End quote. When I lifted the needle off the record, there was complete silence in the room. Some of the students were trying to anticipate what I was going to say. Others were confused, but they were all thinking. I loved it. "Mr. Dylan," quote, "Mr. Dylan is singing about change," I said forcefully while pointing to the seniors in my room. "Because the one constant I can guarantee all of you when you leave high school is that things will change." I'll read it again. It's such an important idea for seniors. The one constant I can guarantee all of you when you leave high school is that things will change. How you handle that change will play a huge role in how successful you become. Some changes you will bring about yourself. College, marriage, jobs. Hopefully those will be good and positive changes. But then there's going to be change that just happens to you. No way in a million years you would want this change. Then I boldly sang as loud as I could, "And now you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changin'." My kids were spellbound as I walked over and picked up the phone. As I dialed the number, I said, "The person who's going to speak to you today could have sunk like a stone." As the ringing of the number came through the speakerphone, the air was thick with anticipation. The voice of Julian McAllister sliced through that thick air like a hot knife when she said, "Hello?" After introducing Julian to my class, I asked her to tell what had happened on that fateful day. Julian started very strong, but it quickly became obvious she was crying. Her voice cracked with emotion as she talked about her son, Casey. Her sobbing was uncontrollable as she described what she had witnessed. She told the class how she watched her 6-year-old son, Casey, get run over by a tractor-trailer truck. After that, she couldn't even talk anymore. The only sound coming through the speakerphone was her weeping. It was intensely emotional. Over 100 kids were in shock, many of them crying too. It took a minute or so for Julian to compose herself. Then she described the horrific sight of watching her son being swept up in the big rig's swirling wheels. I remember the blood-curdling screams, said Julian. One leg was severed above the hip, the other 6 inches below it. As Casey lay there bleeding to death, I gave him a kiss goodbye, a weeping Julian cried. Casey was rushed to a hospital and then to a rural airport where he was flown through a blizzard in a small aircraft to the Salt Lake City airport where a helicopter took him to Children's Primary Hospital. Casey was expected to die along the way. When he arrived at the hospital, Julian was still by his side. Now he was in the hands of God and the surgeons, Julian told my class. Feeling helpless at that point, she did the only thing she could do. She prayed. Julian prayed harder than she ever had. She was praying for her son's life. God answered Julian's prayers, I believe, so Casey could be an inspiration to others. Now he was about to inspire my students, especially the one who complained about sore feet. As soon as Casey started to talk, it was obvious he was only 11 years old. He had the voice of a child, but what he was about to say was anything but childish. I held a newspaper clipping high in the air with a picture of Casey playing baseball. My students gasped when they saw it. Casey's body seemed to be growing right out of the grass. The photograph looked surreal. Casey, I said, when I see this picture of you in the newspaper, I knew you had to talk to my classes. I then shot a series of questions to Casey, which he answered. Question: Casey, what time did you get up this morning? Casey's response: I get up every morning at 5 a.m. Question: why does a kid with no legs get up that early every day? Casey's response: I have a newspaper route and I have to deliver the newspapers before school starts. Question: how does a kid with no legs deliver newspapers? Answer: I usually use my wheelchair. I held up a picture of Casey delivering newspapers in his wheelchair. Question: Casey, I read in this newspaper article that you went on a 10-mile tricycle trip. How does a kid with no legs pedal a bike? Response: I have a custom-made bike. I pedal with my arms. I held up the picture of Casey riding his bike. Question: I also read in this article that you play basketball. How does a kid with no legs run up and down the court? Casey: I just used my arms as my legs. I held up the picture of Casey playing basketball. Question: Casey, I understand that you can swim. How does a kid with no legs swim? Do you wear a life jacket? Casey's response: no, life jackets are for people who can't swim. Casey: how tall are you? Casey's response: 2 feet 7 inches. The nice part about being so short is I get to sleep with all my stuffed toys. I held up a picture of Casey in bed with a mound of stuffed toys piled high while measuring the table that the phone was on. Exactly 2 feet 7 inches. Casey, I played a lot of basketball in my day, and if I'm ever picking teams, I'm picking you first, because it's not about your physical height, it's about your mental height. To me, Casey, you're a 7-footer. Casey, I have students who make excuses all the time about their problems. What advice would you give to those people? Casey's response: I realize there's nothing I can do to change my situation unless they come out with something that can grow legs. I just go with what I have. After thanking Casey and Julian, I hung up the phone. I told my kids, Casey would gladly take on all your problems, add it up together, just to be able to walk out of his classroom. Please don't complain to me about your sore feet, because you just met a man with no legs. One of the unsung heroes of this story is Casey's mom, Julian, I told my class. Here's a mother who gave birth to her son and later watched in horror as he was run over by a tractor-trailer truck. Immediately after the accident, this same mother held her son and gave him what she thought would be her final kiss goodbye. Julian seldom left Casey's side after this tragedy, praying to God the entire time. Then one day, through the grace of God, she brought Casey home. While at home, Casey asked his mom to get him something to drink. And you know what your mom tells you when you ask her to get you something you could easily get yourself. If she's like my mom, she tells you, "You got 2 legs, get it yourself." But what do you say to your son when he doesn't have 2 legs? What do you say then? This brave and loving Mother Julian told Casey to get it himself because she knew if she got Casey that first drink, she'd be getting Casey drinks for the rest of his life. Julian helped Casey become unstoppable. At that point, the student who said he wasn't going to get his project done stood up in front of 100 of his friends and classmates, walked up to me. He was in tears. So were many others. Mr. Sorefeet said, "Thank you, Mr. Conrad. I will never forget this. Oh, by the way, I will finish my project." Several days later, he completed the project. I've shared this story with thousands of others. I also include video footage of Casey wrestling one of my former students. Casey ends up winning the match 6-4. The reaction of the crowd's always the same. They're inspired to tears. In the fall of 2006, I spoke at a high school in Colorado. Afterward, a girl in a wheelchair introduced herself to me. Only months before she was in a motorcycle accident, she pulled her pant leg up and showed me her badly mangled leg. The surgeon who operated on my leg said I wouldn't be able to walk for 6 years. She said, "Mr. Conrad, after seeing and hearing that story about Casey, I'm going to be walking before prom." I made her promise to let me know when she was walking again. Less than 3 months later, she emailed me. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I'm proud to say I've proven the surgeons wrong. 7 months since the accident, I'm walking all on my own. The girl got some of her inspiration from hearing the story about Casey and Julian, who showed the world what's possible with puppy love. And then finally, the unstoppable you doesn't complain of sore feet. I just want to say 3 things for your journals really quickly about this. First of all, let's just point it out one more time. If you learned nothing from your study of the Unstoppable program, and especially reading of the book, it has to be this: the power. Let's write it down right there in your journals. The power of a good word picture. Of a good word picture. Mr. Conrad could have, for example, lectured to this young man forever. But instead what he did is just went and got a powerful word picture. I think the unsaid message is we have to learn to pay attention to the models that are right there in front of our face that we so regularly miss. Number 2, think about the last time you made excuses, sore feet. When you said you couldn't do something that you probably could have done. Of course, we have to ask the question, why? Why the excuses? And there's usually a couple of answers. Laziness, and of course, fear. Right? Because when you say that you're going to do something, if you don't do it, then you feel bad. So it's maybe easier to just never promise to ever do anything. Finally, of course, we're paying very close attention to this idea. There are things in your life that you cannot control. Things that have happened to you, and you cannot control. But there are other things in your life you can control. And of course, the challenge is to control the things that you can control. Now, as has been said many times, many events in your life you can't control, but you can control the way you think about those events, as we have said before. The question is not, why did this happen to me? But rather, why did this happen for me? Lesson 55, Mr. Conrad, a powerful word picture. Maybe some of us will take it to heart. Thank you.